So what happens when a massive government shutdown slams right into a major election? Grinding the whole country to a halt just as everyone's heading to the polls. Is this just business as usual Washington gridlock, or was it something more? A high-stakes political play timed for the biggest possible impact? Well, let's untangle this mess and see what we can find. Yeah, this one line from our source material really just nails the feeling that this whole thing was no accident. It's the core suspicion, right? That a totally routine funding fight was deliberately twisted into a full-blown crisis, just in time for an election. And that right there is the central question we're digging into. Are we looking at a colossal political mistake? Or was this a brilliant, carefully laid trap designed to swing the November elections? To figure that out, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the perfect political storm that set the whole stage. Then we'll look at the shutdown machine itself, how it works. We'll deconstruct the two competing bills at the center of it all, and then see what the election day verdict was and the blame game that came right after. And finally, we'll ask the biggest question of all: who was directing this whole drama? Okay, so first up, the perfect political storm. We've got to begin with the most obvious piece of the puzzle, the timing. I mean, a government shutdown colliding with a major election, it's like it created this political pressure cooker, perfectly timed for maximum chaos. All right, section 2, the shutdown machine. To really get how this happened, you first have to understand the tool, or maybe the weapon that was used. And in this case, it was a really routine but absolutely critical piece of government machinery. It's called a continuing resolution, or just CR for short. Think of it as a temporary patch. It's what Congress uses to keep the lights on and the money flowing when they can't agree on a full, formal budget. It's supposed to be boring, Honestly, the best way to think about it is like the plumbing in a huge building. It's not glamorous, no one pays attention to it, it's just supposed to work in the background. But this time, that plumbing didn't just spring a leak, it completely burst and flooded the whole place. And make no mistake, these things are super common. Since 1977, CRs have been used 47 times to keep the government running. And usually, nobody outside of DC even notices. It's just standard procedure. But this time? Yeah, this time was different. Just how different? Well, as of today, November 6th, this shutdown has been going on for 37 days. That officially makes it the longest government shutdown in American history. It just barely beat the 35-day shutdown back in 2018. And look, this isn't just about breaking some unfortunate record. The real-world cost here is just staggering. We're talking about more than 800,000 federal employees either sent home or working without a paycheck, with their lives totally turned upside down by this political fight. So what was this fight really about? Well, it all came down to two competing versions of that continuing resolution. And this is where the political spin goes into overdrive, because each party insisted their bill was clean and the other side's was loaded with poison pills. So you had this completely wild situation where both parties were on TV telling the American people, hey, we're the reasonable ones. We're just trying to pass a simple, clean bill. And of course, they'd say the other side was the one playing political games. Okay, let's actually break down the details here, because the differences are really telling. On the left, you've got the Republican bill. It was simpler, funding the government for longer through November 21st, and mostly just kept spending the same. To them, clean meant minimal changes. But then you look at the Democratic bill on the right. It was a shorter fix, but it packed in a lot more. It had about $1.5 billion in new funding for programs like WIC, and it added these policy riders that were specifically meant to block or undo some Trump-era policies. So for Democrats, a clean bill was one that actively protected programs from what they were calling GOP cruelty. So, two very different ideas of what clean even means. And all of this political maneuvering, all this gridlock, it brings us right to the climax of the whole story, November 5th. This is the moment that high-stakes political gamble finally met the reality of the ballot box. And I mean, this timeline just lays it all out, doesn't it? The shutdown starts September 30th. For more than a month, while hundreds of thousands of people aren't getting paid, there is total gridlock. Nothing. Then bam, election day. And what happens the very next morning? Well, what do you know? Talks to end the shutdown magically start up again. It's really hard to look at that and think it's just a coincidence. The election results themselves, well, they painted a pretty clear picture. The sources called it a Democratic sweep buffet. You had Zoran Mamdani pull off a narrow win for mayor in New York City. The state legislatures in both Virginia and New Jersey flipped over to Democratic control. And way out in California, a big Republican-backed tax cut, Prop 50, was defeated pretty handily. But hey, you don't just have to take my word for it. In a pretty stunning admission the morning after the election, Donald Trump himself pointed the finger right at the shutdown strategy. He called it, quote, one of the 2 reasons Republicans got hosed last night. So the key takeaway here is that the strategy, whatever it was supposed to be, seems to have backfired, big time. All right, so the votes are in, the damage is done, and now we get to the final act of this whole political drama. This is where both sides scramble to control the story of what just happened. And you can almost see the competing press releases being drafted in real time. The Republican spin is, no, this was strategic. We wanted the Democrats to look like the bad guys and make them own the chaos. At the same time, the Democratic spin is, voter rage over furloughed workers is what gave us these wins, and it proves the GOP's hardline approach is just politically toxic. And now that the election is safely in the rearview mirror, what a surprise, we're being told that talks are suddenly, and I'm quoting here, slightly progressing. It's almost like the political reason for keeping the government closed just evaporated overnight. Which brings us all the way back to where we started. After all the political games, the election results, and the spin, we're left with one big unanswered question. If you think of this as some scripted drama, who was the director? Was it a brilliant trap laid by the Democrats, a massive miscalculation by the Republicans, or was it just, the normal chaotic reality of politics today? We might never know for sure, but what's crystal clear is that a routine funding deadline was turned into a weapon. Governance became a high-stakes gamble with hundreds of thousands of real lives caught right in the middle. And that is the real story of the shutdown, Gamb.